Thank you very much. Good morning. Yes, I'm obviously noted for my comic presentations, but sad to say this won't be one. I'm just going to give you a little bit of background about myself, what we do. I run a company which is a spin-out of UCL, where I work as a research associate, called Animal Systems, and we make a product called Chirp. And Chirp is really one of those things that took us by surprise as a product. We put it out there as a system for exchanging data over sound, so that all kinds of different devices that make sound can, in fact, transfer a small piece of information. This is based on my interest in natural systems and obsolete technology. And the power of Chirp from an Internet of Things perspective is that anything that makes a sound, these are the speakers from a Nokia 6110, a glorious and crappy device, can in fact now broadcast data, as can things that live in greetings cards, those very cheap chips. This is by way of an advertorial. We're shortly going to be releasing Chirp on Chip, Chirp, see on an Arduino form factor there, or Chirpino as we call it. And if anyone is interested in hacking on that, please come and talk to me later. But today, what I really want to talk to you about is the IoT for consumers. We must probably learn to call this CIoT, some awful collision of letters. And I'm going to talk to you about the supply of such a thing, the demand for it. I'm really focused on front-end products. I'm not interested terribly in architectures, into the technological side, but how can we deliver products and services that really matter? How can we find interesting problems to tackle? And we're all clever people here, so we're just going to assume that there are no technical problems and that all of those technical problems can be coped with jointly and severally. Just a few observations by way of a sort of state of the nation. You've obviously all heard of the long nose, the long tail. This is the long nose, which it was first invented by a chap from Microsoft Research whose name temporarily eludes me. And he observed the very long gap between the invention of things we take for granted now, computing, UI affordances like mice and trackballs, etc., to those becoming widespread and generally used. At the same time, so it's not clear to me at all where we are on this part of the long nose. At the same time, there is a splendid book by Stephen Jay Gould, paleontologist, called Wonderful Life. And he spent some time looking at the Bergel shales, these sandbanks in the North Sea, wherein there are lots of dead objects, lots of things that nature has passed by. We've over-evolved. There's worms with spines on their back. There's telepathic starfish with 9 arseholes. There's all sorts of things that were created in this sort of revolution of how can we adapt to a hostile environment, and then were discarded. And we have today the life forms we know and love. And so this punctuated equilibrium is not a smooth process, but it's a jerky one. It proceeds by 2 phases: the cyclic, where things just mumble along quite happily, phase A; the amplic, where they go somewhat nuts. And then we return to some sort of period of relative technical stasis. So I think that's where we are today. I think we're probably in one of those crazy amplic phases. So an experiment was done recently by a chap called Ingo Althofer, computer scientist in Germany. And in researching self-assembly, he put a bunch of Lego in a washing machine, because why not? And this is, one of the experiments of the year, and if you're not familiar with the results, please become so. And after many iterations, of course, this came out. And this is quite a result. This is quite a result. Magic can occur from this sort of process. No, sadly, it wasn't that good. What actually came out was a vast array of 2 pieces, Zwei-Komplexen, as he called them. Sounds so much better in German, doesn't it? And a relatively small array of 6 pieces that have become glued together during the process. And so, I think we're now in the Lego age as regards the Internet of Things. And one observation that Althofer made was that although there were roughly 900 million ways for the 6 pieces to self-assemble, only very few things happened. So there was quite a lot of repetition. There was quite a lot of redundancy. And when we're looking at consumer-ready Internet of Things projects, which you'll have seen, Kickstarter being a great place to look for those, we tend to see a lot of people making the same thing. we tend to see a lot of repetition. And that leads me to some questions, which I'm still trying to work out. Okay, and just as Althoffer's washing machine seems only to have a limited fantasy of what could be built, I think that perhaps we are still gluing stuff together with a limited sense of fantasy about what we could make. So at the moment, of course, we're all gluing together sensors, data sources, services, where there's some innovation in display surfaces, not enough in control surfaces. And then as people, we're a mixture of geeks, strategy wonks, entrepreneurs. Obviously now we're starting to see corporates with this, what I'm referring to as institutional fear of missing out, putting money into the system, trying to create stuff happen. This is where we are today. Typically, this is the lineup of people who are supplying the energy to the Internet of Things infrastructure. We're starting now to see one novel thing which is quite cool, which is startup as a service, which is organizations that have some skills but don't know what they're going to make, but are able to offer their skills as builders, as creators to larger organizations. And then, of course, there's the glorious adhocracy, the undergrowth, which is all of us. On the demand side, it's often noted that technology advances by the sort of police and thieves model, which is to say we have very networked individuals, policemen, these are going to be the first people who will be using Google Glass in anger, and thieves, people who are trying to root round them. There's been a lot of excitement about Bitcoin lately, but Bitcoin and one thinks about drug dealers in Manchester using phone cards in the 80s as a sort of secure virtual currency. So these groups tend to be in advance. These extremivores, people with extreme needs, tend to be in advance using systems, using technologies for all purposes for which they perhaps were not originally designed. So I'm going to offer you a mild provocation now and suggest that when we're talking about the consumer Internet of Things, there's a lot of non-problems being solved. Well, there are a lot of problems which are poorly asked, such that the results are bizarre and pointless. I don't want to single out anyone in particular, their work, but this is the happy fork, which strikes me as an exemplary case of getting it wrong. It's an accelerometry-enabled fork, and it counts the number of times you dip towards your plate. Now, if you think that your eating problems can be solved by a smart fork, guess again, my friends. Here now is Sony SmartWig. So new, it's just a drawing. This is a hilarious pattern. You must read this. The suggestion is that via accelerometry, via little buzzers in the back of the wig, it can tell you where you're going. Perhaps your wig could change colour in response to your mood. I want one. Okay. So we have a problem with who's buying things in the consumer Internet of Things. Here we are on the left-hand side. There's a vast number of real people who are not being served by the kind of technologies that we're creating. So what we really need to do is kind of look for better problems. Let's just put down our devices, step away gently from the machines, and start to locate a bigger problem. In fact, let's look for a need rather than a want. So I'm playing around with this idea of body bits, of somatic bits, and considering one's own personal data needs during your lifetime. So obviously when you're born, that's a form of medical emergency. Oh, I'm born. Anything could go wrong, and some things often do. In infancy, it's vitally important to know about nutrition, about body data, just so you can supply that information for those more qualified to care for you. As you grow older, you have a need for cognitive data. We've got to educate you, we've got to socialise you, we've got to teach you to read, etc. During the majority of your life, you're probably kind of okay, apart from transient or acute illnesses, or apart from times when you're out of context. And the app revolution is somewhat less than revolutionary in the sense that it tends to be a lot of applications for micromanaging your life in ways that it was previously you had no need for it to be micromanaged. I came across an app the other day that in TechCrunch said, amazing app, lets you book haircuts. And I thought this is a real signal of peak app we are probably reaching the point where these things have become so speciated that they are really rather pointless. It's also the case that the quantified self movement, God bless them, these are, by and large, healthy, wealthy, happy people. They don't need this information. There are a great many Nike fuel bands rotting away in sock drawers, and that's fine. As one gets older, of course, the problem gets serious, and your personal body systems start to collapse. It's rather important that you know a little bit about who you are and how well you might be. So what can we do, when we're looking at this problem? Well, there's a massive demographic time bomb coming. We're all aware of this. A quarter of the UK population is going to be over 65 fairly soon. And that manifests itself in three ways. Social isolation. There are an obscene number of people in this age of connectivity who are not connected to friends, not connected to neighbours, not connected to families. Equally, we're going to see the rise of lots of Alzheimer's-related diseases and the number of blind people with physical cognitive impairments is rising sharply. There's nothing that we can do about this. We know that this problem is happening. It's going to happen anytime soon. If you've had any experience of people with any of these issues, and believe me, if you haven't yet, you will soon, you'll realise that we need to sort these issues out. So they're really in the domain of the Internet of Things for healthcare, which is something I'm starting to become interested in. Two areas. One is in the sort of cognitive functions. How can you provide reminders? How can you provide memory for people who are losing their memory, perhaps? And the other is, again, back to the somatic. How can you provide telecare to people who have perhaps issues with mobility, which is causing any of those previously mentioned issues. So what I'm trying to do, and stumbling towards in this case, is trying to work out a sort of general taxonomy of how your needs, how your bodily needs over time fit into the Internet of Things context. And all of this is underpinned by the three big areas. Control surfaces are an obvious one. We have a lot of people for whom just a standard mobile phone is not an option because they can't see. And there seems to me to be insufficient work done in this area. Sensors and connectivities are stuff that, to a degree, sensors anyway will come for free or come for very cheap in future. So a lot of the kind of home networks that we're going to start to see are basically the same thing. People are basically going to be building the same network. This is the redundancy I mentioned earlier. You will have a hub of some kind, some way to collect and collate the data, a series of sensors around the home, and then various control surfaces, interfaces to manipulate that or perhaps make connections outside the home. So I'd like to just mention this today. This is a thing which is not yet a thing, but it seems like a good a place as any to mention it, which I'm calling OPAL, Open Platforms for Assisted Living. There are some of us at UCL who believe that this is an important and interesting area. We're also talking to the Webinos Foundation. Anyone from Webinos here? Anyone know about Webinos? You all should know about Webinos. It's a very interesting Internet of Things stack built on W3C standards. To do some interesting work, we hope, in this area. So I want to now just quickly move on towards how we characterize, typify these things. How's my timing?
You're doing everything. I don't want you to stop.
Okay. All right. Good. Okay. So we're all obviously familiar with the idea of technical stacks. What I'm trying to present here is a kind of cognitive stack, the way in which people understand the things which they own. And I've completely stolen a chap called Krippendorf's idea of product semantics, which is to say how we understand the things by the stories they tell, by the meanings they generate in and of themselves. So I'm proposing a shell model of the Internet of Things. It strikes me that a lot of smart devices, enabled devices, tend to have a dumb core. They need to have a simple thing that they do at root. The light lights up, the printer prints, the key opens doors. There's nothing clever about that. Built on top of which we tend to augment this smart shell and add some networking of some kind. It's critical to remember that for our elderly population, when we think we're augmenting devices, we're not really doing anything of the sort. All we're doing is bringing their ability to use those devices up to the level that we have ourselves as well-abled people. So in that sense, just augmenting devices is interesting because it really gives us the idea of dignity as a design goal. We're not flattering people by making them part of the super future, we're just flattening their ability to deal with the world. On top of that, you may have kind of emotional characteristics. The object may be something that people love, grow to love. It may have the sort of kawaii or cute qualities, an emotional bond between the owner and the object. And of course, without going through all of these in the interest of time, it'll become vitally important that we trust this thing, the provenance of the object. Who made it? Is my kettle mining Bitcoin? That would be a bad thing. Is my LG television, when I stick a USB stick into it, uploading all the file names back to LG? I don't know. That would be a bad thing. But it's vitally important that trust and security is built into the object that we create. And then finally, of course, we have the gestalt, the whole object as it's understood by consumers, the kind of what the fuckery of this new thing that has descended into people's lives. Now, that of course is just a designerly fantasy. This is the reality of how people really understand my shell model. Some people clearly are buying things for reasons which are wholly unintended, or they completely misunderstand the function of a thing, or they buy it for some other element which is non-core. So just a few thoughts on some of these objects. You may be familiar with the concept of a service avatar. Let's say an iPod, for example, is a good idea of a service avatar. It's a physical object which enables you to buy a bunch of digital services. This is my favourite service avatar. It's a tin of Yorkshire tea, which reminds me to buy a paper box of Yorkshire tea. It's a continuous reminder that I am connected to some service for physical product. Let's not underestimate, when we're dealing with consumers, charm. Does this thing create an emotional bond for me? It's no accident, I suspect, that Japanese cultures, animist religions are the first to kind of put faces onto simple objects. You can go a long way, as we have found with Chirp, just by sticking a face on it. And lastly, of course, it is about some kind of radically simple output. It's often said that great technology is indistinguishable from magic. I think that's drivel. I think great technology really wants to be like a spoon. It aspires to the condition of cutlery, something incredibly simple to use in operations or as part of your own body. So here we are back in the throng, in the tumbling of many different disconnected pieces. But I happen to notice that Dr. Althofer's institute was called the Friedrich Schiller Institute, so I will leave you with a thought from Schiller. It's okay to plug stuff in, it's okay to connect stuff that really ought not to be connected. We are going to make mistakes and create some quite stupid devices. However, this is the route to the castle. Thank you very much.